I mean, I'm not sure that, the things that you think I own, I put into trust and they're not actually mine and they haven't been for a decade, isn't maybe the burn that he thinks he is in terms of saying, Yabu sucks to the leaderships of Western economies around the world.
Panel this morning, former leader of the Scottish Conservatives and newbie, well, he's not really new anymore, Times Radio presenter Ruth Davidson joins us this morning alongside Alfie Stirling, the head of economics at the New Economics Foundation. Good morning to both of you.
Morning.
Morning.
Good morning. You can join the conversation too by texting 87222, starting your message with the word Times, tweeting at Times Radio or emailing studio@times.radio. Let's talk about the spring statement, which will be coming at 12:30. You can hear it on Times Radio, of course, live when Rishi Sunak delivers it. Ruth, you're a wise political figure. Explain to me why Rishi Sunak's going to be given this excess money, £30 billion of VAT receipts and other tax receipts going up, a war chest it's being called, and yet he's still going to persist in an unpopular tax hike that will raise $12 billion. Can you believe he's doing that? What's the thinking behind doing that?
Well, I think, first of all, let's look at what we know about this Chancellor. He doesn't like having more than one big fiscal event a year. He likes to have the autumn budget. He doesn't really like to pull all the levers in the spring statement. And indeed, you can't pull all the levers in a spring statement. He's tried to play down expectations. I think it's frankly astonishing that there's not been more leaks from this. So we are all talking a little bit in the dark. But a decision has been made. It's been announced. The national insurance hike was designed to do things that actually were popular. So A, clear the backlog of NHS procedures that have built up over COVID, some of which that predate COVID. And two, once that's helped cleared, transfer over to trying to sort out social care, both of things which desperately need attention. That's a political as well as an economic decision that's been made there. I think what's likely to be seen today is there won't be a rolling back on the rise, but there might be a move in the rate at which you start to pay it, in which case it will be a move that then targets the lower paid more directly. Unlike something which we're also slightly expecting, which is a reduction in fuel duty, for example, because petrol prices, diesel prices are so high, which is indiscriminate. It doesn't matter if you're filling up a Land Rover or Del Boy's three-wheel Robin Reliant, you still pay the same at the pumps, irrespective of what your income is. So I think these are going to be two measures that we should look out for at lunchtime today.
Alfie, is there an argument that inflation is going to go ahead of interest rates for a while? So you can still borrow as Chancellor. It's still relatively cheap to borrow. Is there an argument against borrowing more to give more direct support to people? Or is that not an argument you think a Conservative Chancellor wants to make?
So it is true that borrowing is still highly affordable. The cost of financing our debt is still at near record lows. Historically, it's incredibly low. I think that if we believe we can ensure this living standards crisis is temporary, if we think we know what the causes are, if we can address them, and if we can ride it out through protective measures, then there's a really strong case for borrowing, not least because if we don't borrow, you'll then risk a recession. And that's both kind of further economic misery for families, but it also will erode the public finances through time. So there is a really strong case for borrowing at the moment. But I think actually just going back to this point about tax cuts, actually, if you're trying to address the cost of living crisis, doing that through tax cuts is much like pouring a bucket of water over someone's head who's thirsty. Most of it is wasted. Very little gets to where it's really needed. Ruth's spot on with fuel duty being poorly targeted, but actually, even the national insurance threshold, lifting that threshold at which people start to pay next, isn't well targeted. It's a popular misconception that it helps the poorest. It's the middle earners, middle to higher, benefit much more on those on lower incomes. And that's because you have to be earning a certain amount to benefit. But also, if you even are in work and you're on low income, you'll likely have benefits withdrawn as you receive more from your earnings due to a tax cut. So tax cuts in general are not the best way to address the cost of living crisis.
But they might help the middle people, the squeezed middle, which is another feature of this, that you have the poor who are obviously dramatically affected this, but the nature of inflation, the nature of this crisis is it's going to suck in a whole lot of other people who aren't necessarily normally sucked into this problem.
So the pain is really broad-based. That's absolutely true. And we're going to see now, forecasting at the organisation I work for, the Economics Foundation, showed that if the Chancellor doesn't act, so absent any further measures today, we'll see 23.4 million people come April having to make sacrifices on day-to-day essentials. That's putting food on the table, eating at home, replacing clothing. So it's a really broad base here. But I think it is still true that while it's affecting a wide swathe of the population, the pain is felt most acutely on low incomes. In the end, the cost of living crisis is only a crisis if it exceeds people's incomes, and it's people on lowest incomes that will be hit hardest.
Ruth, Pat McFadden said to Asma earlier on that he thinks this is dreadful party politics at play here, that the Chancellor is raising national insurance now because he wants to cut taxes in 18 months' time ahead of an election. He thinks there's a grid, and that's the reason why the Chancellor is doing this. How cynical should we be about the electoral aspect of a spring statement like this?
Well, I think when you get a member of the Labour shadow front bench coming on a national radio show to say that what's not been announced yet is absolutely terrible and party political, you should probably look at party politics on both sides, because he doesn't know what's in the spring statement. He's trashing it before it's even been out of the Chancellor's mouth. So yes, of course, there's politics that surrounds politics. Of course there is. But there's also going to be a lot of watchers that want to see genuine help to people. Now, in terms of what Labour have asked for, they've asked for things like a one-off windfall tax on energy companies to be put onto energy bills. I'm not expecting to see that today at lunchtime. I don't think that that's something that we would expect. However, I don't discount there being some other lever that's pulled in order to help with energy prices, because that is something that squeezes people, and it is something which, as Alfie says, affects a really broad swathe of the population, from the poorest up into the squeezed middle, in terms of, you know, decisions you have to make about heating your own home. And you know, it's still only March. We can still have a cold snap coming, and these are genuine considerations for people.
Let's move on. Excuse me. Let's move on and talk about sanctions now. The Russian oligarch Alisher Usmanov claims to have evaded UK sanctions by putting his assets into trusts. Alfie, should he be able to do this, and has the government moved fast enough in this case?
I mean, clearly no, he shouldn't be able to. But it's worth pointing out here that this isn't a sort of highly innovative move on his part. This is fairly standard portfolio management, and it's there primarily, or usually, to optimize his tax liability, so to reduce taxes as effectively as possible. So it's worth bearing in mind that, you know, a deregulated financial sector, a tax code that's there to incentivize the super rich to bring their money to London and other financial centres, will engender precisely the types of facilities that will then make it harder to sanction. Whether in this case, so I think, you know, whether that means that it's a case of government acting too slow, I'm not so sure. As I understand that this has been his arrangement for a very long time. It's more a function of the type of economy built around financial sectors and a low tax state.
Ruth, what do you think the actual effect is or has been so far on the Russian oligarchs of these sanctions? I suppose, I mean, you know, Roman Abramovich, because of Chelsea Football Club, is perhaps a different case, because we can see the effect of that. But do you think they've had the desired impact?
Well, look, I mean, I think we've seen some really big headline grabbers. We've seen that yacht that's been impounded in Gibraltar that's about to be put up for sale, etc. Real big flagship ones. But I think what is designed to have done is to create unrest within Russia and in the people that do still have Putin's ear, because the decision about what's being made in terms of bringing Russia to the table in a genuine way will be about the exertion of pressure over time on the Russian leadership. I think in terms of the case that you raised, though, this oligarch, as Alfie says, I mean, I'm not sure that, the things that you think I own, I put into trust and they're not actually mine, and they haven't been for a decade, isn't maybe the burn that he thinks he is, in terms of saying, you know, Yabu sucks to the leaderships of Western economies around the world. However, I think there is going to be an enormous opening up and sort of sunlight disinfectant on exactly what's been going on in the wealth management system, particularly of foreign nationals in the UK. And I think it's long overdue.
But I mean, we set a lot of store. Well, I don't know, we do, but the politicians do in these sanctions. You know, they took a long time to come. And then you remember how the government announced them with these kind of strange graphics on social media, you know, someone's name and then sanction written across it. I
have to say the presentation I was a little bit uncomfortable with, because and I'm as frustrated as anybody else out there about the time it has taken on some things. But I do think there is an argument that that is absolutely valid to say, if we're going to pull levers, we have to know that there's something at the end of them. We have to know that it's legal. And we have to know that confiscating wealth of people stripping of their assets, removing property law, diverting it, all the rest of it. These things are quite fundamental, particularly in a democracy, particularly for people who've not been tried or found guilty of any crime. Now, now the links that they have are absolutely sure, and I think things like unexplained wealth orders, while not going far enough, were important in terms of putting the burden on proof on them to show that they got their assets through legal means. But I do think, as frustrating as it is, and it is frustrating, I do think there is an argument that says we have to make sure that we follow our own rules and laws and values, because that's what makes us better than Russia.
I just want to go back to a point that you made at the beginning, though, which is very interesting, because sanctions are biting for ordinary Russians. We hear about empty shelves, obviously the value of the ruble, etc., some medicines, pharmaceutical supplies, but they don't have the ear of Vladimir Putin. The oligarchs do. But who is in? It's difficult, isn't it? Who is in who has the better position there? It's Vladimir Putin, isn't it? Really, and I wonder how much effect will some oligarchs whinging about losing a yacht have on his bigger picture idea?
I think it comes out both ways. The one that he's really frightened of is Russian mothers, because that's what got him in other expeditionary things that he's done in the past, where young Russian men have been sent into battle, have lost their lives, and have been done in a way that didn't have the support of normal members of his country. The uprising of Russian mothers who could not understand why their sons had been sent to die was overwhelming. So to have some of that, it's really interesting. We've not had official casualty figures since the 2nd of March now. We saw one of the Pravda organizations had put some out and then immediately withdrew them, that was looking at it, was into the thousands. To have that, and to have some of the people that are very influential in Russian society that do have his ear, to have both sides of that putting pressure on him, that is part of the West, who've said they're not going to enforce a no-fly zone, they're not going to send troops in. What can we do? These are some of the things that we can do. So there's unrest on the ground, but also the pressure that's being exerted by the West is also exerting pressure in the Putin bunker at a higher level too.
Let's move on to the royal tour. We don't talk that much about it on this programme, but an open letter was produced by a Jamaican protest group saying that they see no reason to celebrate 70 years of the ascension of your grandmother to the British throne. That's to William and Kate, who are touring in the Caribbean. Alfie, what do you make of it, just as a citizen, as a punter? When you see the pictures of them over the last few days, Kate and William, what do you make of their royal tour to a place ravaged by slavery, obviously, for which the Crown bears historically a great deal of responsibility? What do you make of the tone and the tenor of the pictures you've been seeing?
I have a huge amount of sympathy for those protesting. I find it hugely uncomfortable. It's both very tangibly and metaphorically sending extremely problematic signals, I think. But I think also, just beneath all of that, I also struggle to see why it's news, quite frankly, and it's not a criticism of this show. It is in the news. And I struggle to see that. I mean, even at the best of times, on a slow news week, why it is that we feel like this is the kind of thing that we need to be seeing on our TV screens, but especially in a week where, everything that's going on, things we've just been discussing earlier on the show, from Ukraine, geopolitics and a major economic intervention to respond to a living standards crisis. It's quite remarkable that as a public, we do tolerate these sort of news items.
Yeah, we might tolerate, maybe even demand it, actually, Ruth. I think both Asma and I have been struck of how old-fashioned it seems. So, and so, I don't want to say this, it seems almost patronising. They sort of swoop down from the plane, do a bit of dancing, look all happy, and leave again. What's really gained by all of that?
Well, firstly, I'm being pushed into the promoting the monarchy here.
Good,
but
that's all right.
But let me. Well, I do support them as our head of state, and I support the Queen and all the rest of it. But let's have a conversation about what it is that they're actually doing there. Firstly, in William's speech in Jamaica tonight, he's due to address historic links of slavery. I think they have to be acknowledged. I think having them acknowledged at that level is broadly a good thing if it's done in the right way, and let's see how that's done. In terms of other things that they've done, in terms of looking at some of the environmental factors that affect island nations, doing the scuba diving to the second largest reef in the world to try and shine an international light on that. I think that's broadly a good thing. In terms of what he's done overnight, playing football with Raheem Sterling, looking at what a modern Jamaica is, as well as some of the historical high points like going to Trenchtown, the birthplace of Bob Marley, etc. I don't think necessarily these are bad things to do. And I think in terms of the planning by the palace, they've worked really hard. But whether Alfie and others appreciate it or not, the British monarchy still has a place within the constitution of Jamaica and other island nations in the Caribbean. And I'm not sure that ignoring them, like it's almost a damned if you do, damned if you don't. So yeah, I mean, we can all snigger and say it's lovely that you get a working holiday for a week in the Caribbean. We'd all quite like that. But actually, I think they've tried to do it sensitively as best they can.
Okay, we're going to just end by talking about the date. It's the 23rd of March. It's the 2-year anniversary of lockdown. So I'm quite interested to find out what you were both doing that day. Ruth, we got a text from someone earlier saying that lockdown kind of saved her in a way because, and everyone has a different, approach. Some people hated lockdown, some people lost others. But in terms of their lifestyle, she said that I handed in my season ticket and actually my train season ticket. And that was kind of the saving of me because I was working too hard. I was almost burned out. You're someone we know who lots of people have worked hard, including you. You've worked hard. Did you enjoy slowing down?
Well, first of all, when lockdown started, I didn't. Myself and my partner works for an environmental charity that helps people in fuel poverty and has lots of building sites. It does cladding for building and insulation and things like that. And I was an MSP sitting in the Scottish Parliament. So we were both incredibly busy. She had to shut down building sites. I had to help people try and access the grants, find out what the rules meant for them, all of that. But we also had a 15-month-old son at the time. So we were working an hour on, an hour off and just passing him backwards and forwards between us. I think what saved us was at the initial lockdown, it was lovely weather in Scotland, I think across most of the country actually. And we lived across the road from a council golf course and they lifted all the pins. So we suddenly had a new play space. We suddenly had a new space for the hour that we were allowed out a day. We could take our son across the road. We were a wee bit like, it feels a little bit like Seamus. We were using the bunkers as sand pits and took his toys out and stuff like that. So we had this kind of mix between being like unbelievably busy and trying to organize things and trying to work for other people and ourselves. The busiest we'd ever been, but having constrictions on our time, but also having really concentrated time with our son, which actually was lovely. And he would otherwise have gone to his childminders and we wouldn't have been seeing him during the day while we were working. And there were bits of it that were good for our family. Bits that it was tough, but bits that were also good.
Yeah. It's funny because I'm starting to forget the tough bits now, weirdly. Alfie, briefly, can you remember what you were doing 2 years ago?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't enjoy lockdown. I found myself almost living at work rather than working from home. And I didn't find it particularly pleasant. I didn't like the restrictions in terms of being able to get outside and exercise. But actually, these are all very trivial complaints. And I think the real truth about lockdown was that it shined a spotlight on the level of inequality across the country, because I was very lucky. I had a secure job. I could work remotely. I had a garden. And there were millions of people who were just thrown into financial insecurity because they couldn't go to work, and of course were in overcrowded accommodation without outside space. So my complaints were fairly trivial.
Okay, Alfie, thank you very much for that. And Ruth, that's Alfie Stirling, head of economics at the New Economics Foundation, and also former leader of the Scottish Conservatives and now Times Radio presenter Ruth Davidson.